Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less Show. This is our 112th episode on July 28th, 2022. My name's Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Revolution, nothing less. It's the name of our show. It's our mission, a real revolution for the emancipation of all of humanity. If you say this, if you mean it, if you are working for it, and especially if you are starting to rattle the cage of this system, and if you are doing this when the walls of that cage are cracking, when those who rule are sharply divided, when people's lives are being upended by the workings of the system, and when words of civil war are in the air, when the specter of real revolution to overthrow this system is raised, and it's meant, and people are starting to raise their heads, those who feel threatened will lash out, and they will try to stamp out the contagion of revolution. When such attacks come, know that it is because you are doing something right and righteous. Know that you are striking at the heart of those who have a vested interest of one kind or another in the exploitative and oppressive system that rules over and destroys the lives of people here and all over the world. Know all of that when they come at you, when they come at us. But know this even more. To stand up for the emancipation of humanity, for the liberation of women and all who are oppressed and viciously exploited by this system, to advocate for a way out of the madness of this system, to promote and to defend Bob Avakian, a leader who for decades has been working on charting a path, a strategy to get out from under this oppressive system, to overthrow it through a real revolution, to clear the ground for a radically new society, where with a new state power, people could go to work on overcoming all forms of oppression and exploitation, is not only right and necessary, it is bringing people what they need most. It is serving the people here and around the world in the most meaningful way, bringing to them an understanding of all that afflicts humanity, and it is bringing them the cure, a scientific way to understand the problem and the solution. It is bringing them a roadmap to be taken up ultimately by millions of people rising up for a radically new and far better world. There is no greater love than that, to serve the people of the world by bringing them the way to free themselves and all of humanity. For those of you watching the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show for the first time, the attacks I am speaking of are a barrage of baseless lies, threats, and attempts to isolate, if not destroy, the organization Rise Up for Abortion Rights that alone spearheaded the battle that involved tens of thousands of women, young and old, to try to stop the Supreme Court from overturning the right to abortion by mobilizing people to take to the streets in determined, creative, nonviolent protests. Rise Up was attacked by a motley group of leftist pro-choice groups for its association with us, the revolutionary communists, the Revcoms, with the scare word that we are a cult led by the cult leader Bob Avakian. If this is your first time watching the RNL show, go back and watch the last two episodes, 111 and 110. And if you've seen them before, watch them again. They are provocative, deep programs that have everything to do with fighting for a future worth living in. These programs bring forcefully out why these opportunist forces, who see no prospect of any fundamental change, have such venom against Bob Avakian, who has dedicated his life to the cause of the emancipation of humanity. And I am speaking about how to understand and take on the attacks against the revolution, as well as Rise Up for abortion rights, not just for those of you who are for revolution, but also to all of you who are agonizing, despairing, and furious about a future where women are denied the right to control the future, where the system is destroying the planet we live on, and many other outrages. And to all of you who took and are still taking to the streets righteously to fight for the right to abortion, it matters for you to understand and stand against the attacks on the revolution. In fact, these attacks should drive you to find out about the revolution and its leadership, particularly in Bob Avakian, BA. When revolution and its leadership for a radically new world is under attack, that's when it's time to double down and do so with all the passion and scientific substance we've got. People need to know that there is a way to get free, that this system is not all there is or could be, and that a better world is possible. They need to know this, even when they don't know they need it or think they need it, because they have been thinking in the way this system has conditioned them to think. So without apology or half-stepping, we have to struggle hard with people over all the things, all the thinking that this system promotes. The profound individualism of me-first entitlement that comes from living at the top of this imperialist dung heap of an empire. We double down on promoting and defending the revolutionary leadership of Bob Avakian because we have learned from the history of this country how its rulers foment divisions among the people, demonize and isolate revolutionary leaders, and even eliminate them. Malcolm X and the charismatic young leader of the Chicago Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton, to name just two. This isolation and demonization we will not allow, and neither should you. We double down on upholding, defending, and fighting far and wide for the leadership we have in Bob Avakian, because to make a revolution anywhere in today's world, and especially in a complex society like this, requires far-sighted and rigorously scientific leadership. BA is that and much more. He has developed the new communism, which is, as his official biography states, quote, a continuation of, but also represents a qualitative leap beyond and in some important ways a break with communist theory as it had been previously developed. A hallmark of the new communism is that it, quote, thoroughly repudiates and is determined to root out of the communist movement the poisonous notion and the practice that the ends justify the means. It is a bedrock principle of the new communism that the means of this movement must flow from and be consistent with the fundamental ends of abolishing all exploitation and oppression through a revolution led on a scientific basis, end quote. Think about how refreshing, how principled, how liberating, and in line with the interests of humanity this ethos is, in stark contrast to the gotcha, identity politics, and cancel culture that saturates the political atmosphere today. All of what I have just said thus far runs through and is the theme of today's RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. And later, in today's episode, we're going to hear from Bob Avakian from his 2012 film, BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less, with straight talk on his leadership. We're also today going to play a few excerpts from a Zoom conference with about 200 people that I did with Sunsara Taylor earlier this week, titled, When Headlines Scream Communist Cult is Hijacking the Abortion Movement, What Are They Trying to Stop? And What Don't They Want You to Know? We also have a brief segment on the article by Bob Avakian, BIPOC Leadership, There Is No Such Thing, the Fight Against Oppression and the Leadership That Is Needed. And then this will be followed by, in concluding our program, a short segment on the struggle of women in Iran. We begin today's program with my co-host, Sunsara Taylor from New York City, speaking on the first aftershocks of overturning the right to abortion and the nightmare future if we don't stand up and fight.
Back in the 1980s, Bob Avakian analyzed the ways that the social position of women and the traditional family was undergoing significant changes due to the fierce struggle of women for their liberation, as well as because of changes in the economy that were drawing more and more women into the workforce at all levels. Looking at this and how all of this was crashing up against the reality that the system we live under, capitalism, imperialism, has patriarchy and the patriarchal family woven into its dynamics and structures and cannot do it without it. Bob Avakian made this profoundly prescient, but his far-sighted observation. He said, the whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radically reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all such forms of enslavement? And the truth of this powder keg and this intensifying contradiction about what the future will be for women has been borne out since that time. A Christian fascist movement has harassed and shamed women, bombed clinics, killed abortion doctors, captured the Republican Party, state legislatures, and now the Supreme Court. And now they've overturned abortion rights nationwide. And all along the way, they never hid their full mission. To not just ban abortion, but to slam women backwards into open subordination to men and to the patriarchal family. And they've never hidden how this was a battering ram for a whole larger theocratic fascist program, taking back the rights of LGBTQ people, resurrecting undisguised white supremacy, and moving to rip up the rule of law and democratic and civil rights throughout the land.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closet. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America.
Our form of government came directly from the Bible. There is no question about it.
We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
When two people in a family become absolutely legally equal, there is no head, both become independent of each other, and love is destroyed.
Of course, we had prayer in the schools until 1962, and this country, in a lot of ways, was a lot better off before 1962.
I agree with capital punishment, and I believe that homosexuality is one of those that could be coupled with murder and other sins. It would be the government that sits upon this land who would be executing the homosexuals.
Yet during this same time, what of the Democrats and those movements that have been slavishly tied to the Democratic Party? What have they been doing? They have not only failed to mobilize serious opposition in the streets to this enslaving drive to take away the right to abortion, they have sought common ground with these fascists. For years, Hillary Clinton and other leaders of the Democratic Party insisted that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, conveying that there is something wrong and shameful about women deciding for themselves when and whether to have a child.
We can support a woman's right to choose that makes abortion safe, legal, and rare, and reduces the number of abortions.
Our vision should be of an America where abortion is safe and legal, but rare.
So let us work together to reduce the number of women seeking abortions.
When Dr. George Tiller, an abortion provider of tremendous commitment, who continued to do abortions for women even after having been hunted down and shot in both arms by an anti-abortion fanatic.
What I am doing is legal, what I'm doing is moral, what I'm doing is ethical, and you're not going to run me out of town.
When he was assassinated in his church in 2009,
Central County 911.
Hey, somebody just came in and shot him in our church.
Somebody shot someone?
Yes, Dr. Tiller. Dr. George Tiller was just shot.
there were nearly 1,000 people who turned out to his funeral in Wichita, Kansas. People who knew him, who loved him, who had his life, their lives given back to them through the abortions he provided. Let me tell you, not a single leader of the Democratic Party, or not a single leader of any of these national movements of the so-called women's movement, so-called pro-choice organizations, none of them even showed up. I know, because I was there.
Zee Sunsara Taylor, and I'm a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party. I came down to Wichita. It's 1 week since Dr. Tiller was assassinated.
This was shameful. Instead, these Democrats have led people to just absorb each new attack and just work to defend what is left of abortion rights on constantly shrinking ground, again and again. Then, last December, when it became clear that the Supreme Court was on track to overturn abortion rights nationwide, this dynamic of accommodation turned to outright capitulation. That is, giving up without even waging a fight. You see, the Democratic Party was afraid to fight this attack. The Democrats were scared of the millions and millions of fascists who've been fighting for decades to overturn abortion rights and have proven time and again their willingness to resort to violence.
You ain't seen an insurrection yet. You keep on pushing our buttons, you low-down sorry compromisers. you God-hating communist America. You'll find out what an insurrection is, because we ain't playing your garbage. We ain't playing your mess. My Bible says that the church of the living God is an institution that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And the Bible says that we'll take it by force. That's what the Bible says.
The Democrats were scared of the fact that the Supreme Court can no longer be relied on to hold back these attacks, because it too has been captured by fascist fanatics. And the Democrats are terrified of the one force that does have an interest and could be mobilized to fight these attacks: the millions and millions of people in this country who support the right to abortion. Because despite appealing to these people for their vote, the Democrats know that if these people really got out in the streets to protest and resist this direction, if they got out there and got their fury being felt, this could get way outside the bounds of the system that these Democrats represent and serve. And so this is why there was so much vitriol thrown at Rise Up for Abortion Rights when it did begin to get out there and tap into the fury of tens of thousands of people in this country, and especially the fury of young women whose whole future is on the line. And this is why a big part of the unprincipled attacks and lies that have been hurled at Rise Up for Abortion Rights have focused up on the role of the Revcoms. Because those who rule this system and others who have a lot invested in it, even if they pose as oppositional or radical, they are all terrified of a real revolution, a real strategy to bring this system down, and the leadership for that getting out there and connecting with this fury. And through it all, many of those who are now waging the most dishonest and unprincipled attacks have been busy trying to dress up their capitulation as defiance, trying to put perfume on shit. Some of them literally said, it doesn't matter if the Supreme Court overturns abortion rights. We'll have the abortion pill forever.
Republicans might have the courts, but we're out here having abortions, right? They can't stop them.
We'll just teach women how to induce their own abortions using the abortion pill that they can get through the mail. And one of their talking points was to stress that if something goes medically wrong, those women can just go to the hospital and their symptoms will present the exact same as a naturally occurring miscarriage. And so the hospitals will treat them just the same, and it'll be safe and it'll be fine. Others said the focus should all be directed towards raising money to help women travel, as abortion is banned where they live. So let's see how this is actually playing out now that abortion rights have been overturned. Sometime last year, a 35-year-old woman from Texas named Amanda suffered a miscarriage. The hospital promptly scheduled her for an appointment to scrape out the contents of her uterus to be sure she didn't hemorrhage or get infected. She was grief-stricken about the miscarriage, but the procedure went smoothly, and the hospital staff was wonderfully supportive, as they should be. So naturally, when she went to the exact same hospital earlier this year, in excruciating pain and massive bleeding, and she learned that she was again suffering a miscarriage, she asked for and she expected the same treatment. But the hospital said no. What had changed? In between these two miscarriages, Texas had banned almost all abortions. And the abortion rights activists were not wrong when they explained that the treatment for an incomplete self-induced abortion by the pill is no different than the treatment for a naturally occurring miscarriage. They weren't wrong that they present the same, but they were deadly wrong to suggest that women would now get the treatment that they need for either. What happened to Amanda next is barbaric. She was sent home by this hospital and she was forced to bleed and cramp in pain so intense that she left fingernail marks scratched into the walls of her bathroom as she sat on the toilet and bled. And for 48 hours, this went on. She was bleeding and cramping, holding her husband's hand, and they were both crying. And even after the worst was over, this went on, the bleeding, for another week. And Amanda was lucky. All the fetal tissue left her body. She didn't get infected. She didn't die. But she could have. That is what happens to women all over the world. In 2012, 31-year-old Savita Halapanavar died after days of a worsening infection from a miscarriage, and she was in the hospital the entire time. But they wouldn't intervene because of the very strict anti-abortion laws in Ireland at that time. They let her die. Earlier this year, Isabella Sajbor sent text messages to her husband and her mother from a hospital in Poland where they let her die as she miscarried. "My whole life is in danger," she wrote, adding, They cannot help. As long as the fetus is alive, thanks to the anti-abortion law, a woman is like an incubator. She texted this in her final moments before she died in a hospital. It's just a matter of time before this happens here. A woman named Gabriella from Missouri was denied the best medication for her miscarriage because of the anti-abortion laws. And even then, when she went to the pharmacy, she couldn't get the prescription for the medication they gave her until she was publicly shamed and humiliated by having to say through tears to the pharmacist that she was indeed having a miscarriage, not inducing her own damn abortion. Meanwhile, what of these abortion funds? Well, predictably, they are totally outstripped by the millions and millions of women who've already lost access. But that's not even the worst of it. Continuing with the same capitulationist logic that led them to accept the fall of Roe without waging a fight, many of them are closing up shop, turning their backs on the very women they claim to serve without a fight because they don't want to get in legal trouble now that there's abortion bans. Just think about the social effect it would have if some of these people were to stand up and say, we're still going to serve women. This is their lives at stake. And risk the arrest and fought the arrest if it came. Imagine who could be mobilized to fight. You see, there is no progress without struggle and sacrifice. And that's what this pacified, domesticated, NGO-eyed movement is so terrified of. Capitulating yet again, shattering lives in the process. Meanwhile, the full horror of what the loss of abortion rights nationwide means is just beginning to be felt. The lives shattered by forced motherhood, the doctors in jeopardy, the women with cancer who are being denied life-saving treatment out of protection of the fetus, and so much worse to come. There's not going to be some muddling along in the middle. Things are going to extremes. So to repeat, from that prescient quote from Bob Avakian with which I began this segment, the question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all forms of such enslavement? So it is necessary that people from very diverse political perspectives have come together in Rise Up for Abortion Rights to tell the truth that forced motherhood is female enslavement and to fight for abortion on demand and without apology. At the same time, as we live through seismic shocks, not only for the future of women, but in almost every dimension of society, and the future itself is increasingly coming up for grabs, I want to put a serious challenge to you. Dig into, lift your sights to, and take up the roadmap for a real revolution that Bob Avakian has laid out. Make your fight against the enslaving oppression of women today be part of getting to a world where never again does a woman anywhere on this planet have to bitterly remark that she is being treated as an incubator as she lay dying from the barbaric practices of this system. Break the chains. Unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for this revolution.
The day after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, as thousands of people were taken to the streets nationwide in outrage, a group of pro-choice activists launched a vicious attack on Rise Up for Abortion Rights, full of slanders, distortions, and outright lies, with a particular focus on baseless accusations directed at Bob Avakian and the Revcoms. These lies spread across the internet and were further amplified in the Daily Beast and the supposedly progressive Intercept, and then picked up by the fascist Daily Caller and Law Enforcement Today. This disinformation campaign has been thoroughly refuted at riseupfораbortionrights.org, revcom.us, and right here on the RNL Show. This past Monday night, RNL Show host Andy Zee and co-host Sunsara Taylor held a Zoom webinar to flip the script on these attacks and involve many more people in going on the counteroffensive with this revolution and the leadership we have for this revolution in Bob Avakian. The webinar was titled, "When Headlines Scream, Communist Cult is Hijacking the Abortion Rights Movement. What are they trying to stop and what don't they want you to know?" Over 200 people participated in this webinar. People made comments and asked questions live, as well as in the chat. here's a small sample of what was said and the responses from Andy and Sunsara. We need a lot more discussion and debate, and we'll be featuring more of this kind of engagement in the weeks ahead. So let's get into it.
I think, something that's confusing for a lot of people, especially a lot of well-intentioned people, is that a lot of these attacks are coming from people who proclaim themselves to be communists or socialists or leftists of some sort, anti-capitalist, and that they therefore dodge the accusation of engaging in any kind of McCarthyism or whatever, and that it gives them some kind of credentials, right? Some for people. And so I just wondering if you could speak to that. There's a lot there, but the particularity of the attacks that are coming from other self-proclaimed leftists on Rise Up, BA, and the Revcoms. It's one thing when people who are, mainstream establishment liberals or fascists are attacking Rise Up and the Revcoms and BA. It's kind of a different thing, I think. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to maybe where that's coming from and why that might be so.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that for a lot of people, it's really shitty. It's really outrageous when the rulers, the oppressors, come down like a ton of bricks on the masses of people. It's infuriating and people want to fight it. But it is, like John said, it's very disorienting and often very demoralizing. And especially the first time you really get hit by attacks from people who are quote unquote supposed to be on your side. And I know it's I just want to acknowledge that, because I think a lot of people have, especially I know a lot of the young people who got involved, and not only, but got involved in standing up against the assault on abortion rights. And then not only did the state take this right away and women's lives are being shattered and all of this is coming down. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But then you have this ugly shit, really ugly accusations, snark, slander, all this stuff coming from quote unquote the left. And so it is disorienting. But I want to say, we didn't play it here, but in the episode 111, we played from Bob Avakian on All Played Out, which is an amazing spoken word piece put to beautiful music by William Parker, the bassist, jazz bassist, and other musicians. And he says, look, you have a left, quote unquote, in this country that is dried up and desiccated. When they talk of socialism, it's lacking any vitality or love, and it's definitely lacking in internationalism and lacking the real fire of bringing this system down and overthrowing it. And so you have, and I'm not everybody who considers themselves of the left, but you definitely have people who have built up an identity for themselves. And in a certain sense, a commodity of being, I'm a leftist, I'm a communist, I'm a this, I'm a that, but they're not actually working to bring this system down. They're not actually willing to go and wage the struggle necessary for that, both up against the enemy and up against the backwards ways of thinking among the people. A lot of what passes for socialism and communism in this country, and especially among those attacking, is let's get a little bit more of the spoils of the American empire and distribute them a little bit better to those of us living here. What about the little guy in this parasitic country? But it's not about ending imperialism and the exploitation of this country over the rest of the planet. And I just think there is as much animosity for real revolution among some of these eddies. And I really mean, if you know, like a river is like moving, raging, the water's moving, there's currents. And eddy is that little part that swirls on the edge and circles and it gets rancid and things grow in it and it's not fresh water and it's going around and around. These are little eddies. They're part of the ecosystem of capitalism, imperialism, of niches of people who have a career and a lifestyle and an identity built up in being an oppositional force within the empire, but they're not actually about ending this empire. And what BA is doing and what the Revcoms are doing is actually outside of that and about bringing this down. And it's worth noting, too, that when you go outside the movement, and we have to get way beyond, if we're going to make a revolution, we have to get way beyond the so-called movement. We have to get to the millions and millions of people in this country who are being forced to think about things that are crashing into their lives right now because of the crisis of this system and the horrors it carries out, but are not sitting there living and found a lifestyle, being being in a movement, the people who are living and looking at this world and open to radical understanding of the root of the problem and the way to change it and the leadership that we have for that. And I'm not writing off everybody in the movements. I'm not writing off everybody in the left. Far from it. I'm just saying there are people, you think about it for a second, it makes sense. That's a part of the ecosystem of the empire is people who have, that's their lifestyle.
I want to speak to something which I think is very important that people look at this, because you say, John, that something that really confuses a lot of well-intentioned people is that a lot of these attacks are coming from self-proclaimed socialists and even communists. Okay, they proclaim themselves that. But then we should ask them a question. Honest people should ask them a question. What's your vision of socialism? Who does it include and who does it not include? Is it only for people in this country, or is it something that everybody around the world should include? Is the socialism just going to be about everybody getting a fair share of a fair income, or is it going to be actually overcoming things like patriarchy and the oppression of people because of the nationality they are or the gender they are? What about that? How are you? And then ask them, how are you going to overcome that? You think you can overcome that? As long as you have capitalist banks and financial institutions and corporations that have only one purpose, which is the purpose of turning a profit. How are you going to do that? Oh, you can't do it that. So you need a different social system, a different economic system. This is a big part of what Bob Avakian's gone into. You need a different mode of production from what people live under today. Okay, you need a different. Now, how are you going to get that when you have an entire state structure of police and FBI and National Guard and armies and all of this enforcing all this? You have to have a revolution to get rid of that. Okay, but then you have a revolution. You think everything's going to go, what's your strategy for once you have a revolution for actually getting to overcome all forms of oppression? Have you thought about that? No, I don't think you have yet. See, let's look at, you can go to the websites of these various socialists and communists and anarchist groups and see, well, what is their future? How do they envision the future? What's their program for that? And then go read some Bob Avakian and see how he's actually developed a constitution where people would have a far better way of life, a greater ability to participate in society, and could go to work on overcoming all these forms of oppression. This is a big deal. We're not sitting here saying Bob Avakian because, but because he's developed a way out of the madness.
Then, about an hour into the Zoom call, some haters and trolls got in the chat trying to bait people into responding to the grievances of NYC for Abortion Rights, the group that launched these unprincipled attacks in the first place. Here, Sunsara Taylor speaks to the line that must be drawn between the kind of principled discussion and debate we need with those who disagree with us on the one hand, and the kind of lies and counter-revolutionary wrecking activity that we will not debate and that no one should tolerate on the other hand. Watch this.
I see in the chat people linking to New York City for Abortion Rights are the ones who launched the original attack on Rise Up for Abortion Rights and on the Revcoms and BA. And people are saying, read their politics. Here's their link. They did protest, blah, blah, blah. I acknowledge that. They did protest. We did not, I just want to be clear, we did not launch an attack on New York City for abortion rights. We actually, Rise Up, I know because I was involved in it, we reached out to them. We reached out to all these organizations. We said, let's unite all who can be united. If you care about this, let's stand up and stop the overturning of Roe. They did not take us up on that. We still didn't attack them. They issued a libelous COINTELPRO style attack, which is destructive to the truth, to justice, to movements of opposition, and yes, to revolution and revolutionary leaders in a country where anybody who claims to be a leftist ought to know or ought to find out quickly that this country, like every country, but especially this one, has a history of targeting, isolating, and neutralizing revolutionary leaders. And a big part of how they do that is they create a cloud of suspicion, of rumor mongering, not principled debate. So when they issued an attack like that, that crosses a line. And at this point, I don't want to have a discussion with them about their strategy. People should not work with people who launch counter-revolutionary and unprincipled and dishonest, wrecking, opportunist attacks. If they repudiate that, if they take it down, which would be easy to do, especially since it's dishonest, if they say this was wrong and here's what we've learned, and actually we have a different strategy, let's discuss that, that would be fine. But I'm sorry, you don't get to, and I don't mean it like just a personal thing you don't get to, it is destructive to the interests of the people, to the fight for justice and a better world, to blur the lines between, and people have been asking this in the chat too, oh, are you engaging in cancel culture? Cancel culture is wrecking and rendering people toxic based on rumors and things that are secondary and things that don't characterize them overall, and being afraid of engaging what they actually have to say. What was done with these attacks and the people who participated in them is destructive. It crossed a line. And people need to learn the difference and draw that line sharply. I don't think there's a debate to be had until they repudiate their lies and wrecking.
After Andy Zee spoke to the breadth and depth of Bob Avakian's whole body of work, inviting people to use their critical thinking skills and get into it, some haters in the chat started complaining about people plugging Bob Avakian. Here's how Sunsara Taylor responded.
I appreciate everybody who spent 2+ hours. Really, these questions matter. You put your time, you put your thoughts. They're very thoughtful comments. We're going to get into them. And I know there's people who couldn't resist coming in and trying to spread bullshit. And I just can't resist one piece of bait they put at the end. So I'm going to touch it and then I'm going to say goodnight. Somebody says, oh, here it comes, the BA plug, which I have to say, first of all, I'd rather, you're never going to make me feel ashamed of standing up for, proudly fighting for, saying that I follow and encouraging others to follow somebody who's fucking put themselves to how to bring this beast of imperialism down and lift it off the backs of humanity. I mean, if that's what you got, oh, you're going to plug the guy who's figured out how to emancipate humanity. If that's what you have to come with, it's weak shit, okay? This is BA as somebody who is, think about what that means. Year after year after year, people turn their backs on revolution. People give up. Those who used to be into the revolution make careers out of attacking it because they can become professors. They can get their books published. They have positions. BA didn't take this road because it was the easy road. He took it because everything that generation in the 60s fought against, the imperialist wars, the destruction of the planet that people were just starting to come to grips with and begin to recognize, the violent centuries, millennia of subjugation, of women being treated as fucking objects and possessions. And there was a struggle, a women's liberation movement here and around the world, people lifting their heads. And yes, everything Jim talked about, the struggle of gay people, lesbians. And then as that expanded, as that question got pushed forward and people stood up, LGBTQ rights and BA actually leading the Revcoms to re-examine the inherited communist position on those questions and break new ground. And so many other questions. This matters. I'd fucking plug that anytime, any day, anywhere. And I'd be proud of it, and it was more than a plug, and it's shameful. You want to argue another way out, bring your best argument. Don't bring that garbage. And nobody watching should have 1 ounce. Yes, all that's playing on is the social prejudices of people who've been, yes, brainwashed by growing up in this parasitic society that you shouldn't follow anybody. The only thing that matters is you. And no, you're not being led around when you're being told to just go along with the workings of this system. So yeah, that kind of attack plays on popular prejudices. It's cheap. And we should have no defensiveness in the face of it. We should call it out and we should tell people absolutely examine, compare this, compare that, compare where this leader is going, compare that other shit. And let's have a debate on the substance. And the other thing I want to say is to everybody, Andy, you said this earlier, but it matters. To everybody who saw the horror and sensed it on some level and frankly came to deeper grips with it as they stood up, what it means that the state was going to take away women's right to abortion, rip this right away, slam women backwards and as a linchpin and battering ram of a whole fascist assault and put themselves to that fight shoulder to shoulder with people who are nothing like them. People they didn't know, people who thought differently than them, including, yes, some Revcoms who played an important role in that, as did others from their own perspective. If you were part of that, that was right. And more people need to be part of it. It mattered. It actually mattered. We did not win, but it mattered There's a fighting pull. There's an opposition. There's a refusal in the bloodstream of this country's psyche right now that wouldn't have been there if not for what we did together. And people need to come back into that and strengthen that and rebuff. You don't have to, honestly, you don't have to agree with the Revcoms. You don't even have to engage BA. I would argue you should, but you don't have to engage BA and the Revcoms to be in Rise Up, to be in that fight. But all of us who care about justice and principle and the future need to reject and call out the scurrilous attacks on Rise Up for abortion rights, on the Revcoms, on myself, and on BA, because this is destructive to humanity's future and our ability to stand together and fight. And so there's a lot at stake. It's really important we took this time together. We're going to go into it more. We're going to stay on these questions, and we're going to do it as part of going on the offense to change the world, because that's the whole point.
The excerpts of the Zoom webinar that we just watched was part of kicking the campaign to grow the audience of this, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, into high gear. We're going into battle, not mainly against the haters, naysayers, people, and organizations who seek their place within this system. We are in a political battle to organize the forces for an actual revolution to overthrow this system and bring about a radically new and far better system. We are living in a moment when revolution could be possible. There is a framework and a roadmap for that revolution in Bob Avakian's decisive work for this time. Something terrible or something truly emancipating. Profound crisis, deepening divisions, the looming possibility of civil war, and the revolution that is urgently needed. In the opening paragraph of this work, in addition to key works that Bob Avakian has written, BA says that everyone concerned about the questions reflected in the title of this work should go regularly to our website, revcom.us, and watch the weekly YouTube show, Revolution Nothing Less, that sharply illustrates why a real revolution is urgently needed and is possible, and what are the goals of this revolution, and how to be part of building for this revolution. Brutal and murderous white supremacy, male supremacy, and other oppressive relations, the deepening crisis in society and the world overall, including the constant wars and continuing destruction of the environment. All this cannot ultimately be resolved in any positive way within the confines of the system that rules in this country and dominates in the world as a whole, the system of capitalism-imperialism. And because of the deep divisions in this country, divisions that cannot be reconciled within the normal workings of the government and society, there is the possibility to break the hold of this system over the masses of people and repolarize society, bringing forward and building the forces of revolution. First in the hundreds, in areas all over the country, and welding them together as an organized force, and to develop and train revolutionary leaders on the basis of the scientific method and approach of the new communism that has been developed by Bob Avakian. This is the fight for the future, the fight for that future to be truly emancipating. And a key battle in that fight is taking up and building up the audience of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show quantitatively and qualitatively. In every episode, we expose the outrages and crimes of this system, going to the root of the problems and showing how the oppression and the exploitation of this system cannot be reformed, bringing home to people that any other solution other than revolution is, in the final analysis, bullshit, as Bob Avakian has shown. But here's something else. The masses of people who hate the shit this system does to them and the people around the world are themselves filled with all the bullshit lies and ways of thinking, from this putrid me-first culture to believing in salvation through gods that don't exist and that keep people chained in mental slavery. Taking up and going into political battle with this show every week is part of casting off the shackles of mental slavery and getting with the liberating scientific method and approach of knowing the world as it actually is and changing the world through revolution to emancipate humanity, bringing to people the new communism and the leadership of Bob Avakian. You don't like what this system does to the people? Get 100 people to watch the show. People tell you they don't want to watch a show about revolution and the new communism. Tell them they don't know what they're talking about and to stop opening their mouths and letting the system speak, as Bob Avakian has called it out. Watch the show every week with friends or family. Show it in a cafe or a bar or a community center and let the discussion rip and let us know about it. For the RNL Show to break through the algorithms of YouTube and the social media, for posters and stickers to be everywhere, it's going to take a lot of money for materials and advertising. So become a Patreon today. Donate. Become a subscriber to our channel and all of our social media at the Revcoms. Sign up to join our online group that is meeting to work on spreading the RNL Show. Comment below and join the dialogue. Every week on our show, we're going to take a comment or a question from the comments below and speak to it. There needs to be a big society-wide debate over reform versus revolution. Don't let people bullshit you and deceive themselves and others with all the midterm election hype. Bring them the liberating truth, the real deal of getting organized now for a real revolution with the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show and the revolutionary leadership of Bob Avakian. In 2012, Bob Avakian gave a major speech. BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less. You can see the title on the t-shirts of the Revolution Clubs, and we take the name of our show from that talk. And towards the end of this speech, Bob Avakian goes into why we need leadership, what scientific communist leadership means for the masses of people. Last week in RNL show number 111, we played the first part of this segment of his talk, showing how, similar to the Rosetta Stone and how it unlocked the understanding of ancient Egypt, the scientific method and approach of the new communism unlocks an understanding of the problem and solution for the masses of people of the world. Today, we are going to play the next part of this section where Bob Avakian goes into some straight talk about his leadership. In this, he refers to a campaign in 2012 called BA Everywhere to spread the word of his leadership everywhere. And as we have brought out already in today's show, doing this is a key part of the work we do today to organize the forces for revolution. And then after this excerpt from the film, Pete from the RNL crew is going to highlight a new piece from Bob Avakian titled BIPOC Leadership. There is no such thing. The fight against oppression and the leadership that is needed.
I just want to touch on a couple of quick points and then move to a conclusion. I thank you all for hanging in with me all this time. Something that's out there that I wanted to speak to in terms of leadership and my own leadership in particular is I know this goes on in whispers, or some people say this among themselves if they don't always say it out loud. Especially among people who've had the bitter experience of being betrayed by leaders, in particular, great white fathers. They say, BA, why do you have to be white? Why couldn't you be black or something? Now, I used to get this back in high school. Back in the days at Berkeley High School, where I went to school, my black friends would often say to me, Bobby, that's what they used to call me back then, Bobby, it's a shame you're white. You would make a really great brother. Now, I've always considered that the highest of compliments. But here's the thing. If I were black, I wouldn't be Latino. If I were half black and half Latino, or part black, part Asian, part Latino, and part Native American, and still from America, I wouldn't be from the other parts of the world that are dominated and plundered by American imperialism. I wouldn't be Bangladeshi or Iranian or Arab, for example. If I were male, I wouldn't be female. If I were female and straight, I wouldn't be gay. And so on, and so on, and so on. And where does this end? And really, what is this all about? Once more, we're back to the question, what is the leadership we need? Well, that depends on what we're striving for. It's back to the big question, why are we in the situation we're in today? Can anything be done to really change this? And if so, what is that change? And how can that change be brought about? to put it another, perhaps simpler way, what is the problem and what is the solution? That tells us what we need to be aiming for, and therefore what kind of leadership we need. Now, as a matter of fact, what I am today is in very important ways and to a very great degree the result of the influence of black people in their struggle, although there have been other influences that have also played an important part in my development. But the most important thing is this. At a certain point, I made a leap to becoming a revolutionary and a communist. And that is a leap that people, more and more people, have to make who want to see an end to all this madness and want a whole new liberating reality for humanity. If we want a world where never again will another youth be shot down by marauding, murderous police, where never again will a woman be raped or brutalized, where never again will masses of women and men be treated in any way as less than fully human, where never again will children die in huge numbers in their infancy, and never again will generation after generation face the same killing madness. If we want a world where all this is finally ended, along with 1,000 other outrages that seem so much a natural part of the human condition, but in fact are totally unnecessary at this point in human history, we need communist leadership, the most advanced, seriously scientific, and far-seeing communist leadership we can get. Many people also say, well, if BA is our leader, the leader of this revolution, then we need to be able to see him and talk to him directly. But the point is, what someone stands for and where this will lead people. What will happen if that person's ideas are taken up and fought for? That is the fundamental question, not whether you can see somebody and literally touch them. And there is the fact, let's be real here, revolution, if it's going to succeed, is going to involve millions and millions of people. And while it is a great thing to have the chance to be among and talk to some of these people who will be part of this revolution, still there are bigger things that have to be kept in mind, including how the powers that be look at and seek to deal with revolutionary leaders. And the fact is that even if I devoted the rest of my life to this, there is no way that I could personally meet with anything more than a small part of the millions who must be part of this revolution. We have launched a campaign which we call BA Everywhere to get this new synthesis of communism, the body of work, the method of approach, and the leadership that is involved with this out very broadly in society. We still have much work to do on that, and we need to go out and raise big money from all kinds of people and get big contributions of ideas, people giving 50 cents or $50,000 and contributing all kinds of ideas of how we can actually break through and get this revolution, the need for this revolution and the leadership we have for this revolution and the content of this revolution out broadly impacting society in a big way. This is what we need to be doing. And in carrying this out in a real sense, the answer to the question, where is BA, needs to be everywhere. This is how the question has to be understood and approached. How can you tell if a leader in a party are for real and will lead things where they need to go? In most basic terms, this is a matter of line, as we say, or to put it another way, a matter of policy and guidelines for the struggle, but above all, a matter of outlook and method and basic strategy and program that set the terms in a fundamental sense for how the struggle should be carried out and carried forward and toward what ends, all along the way and in an overall way. What line is put forward by a leader or group? How is that line carried out and to what effect? Those are the key questions. Now, defending and protecting leadership, as we have put it in our party, building a wall of support and defense around leadership which really does represent the revolutionary way forward. Working to defeat attacks on this leadership and to turn this into further exposure of this system and resistance against its completely illegitimate rule. This is a crucial part of building the movement for revolution and working to bring into being the basis for revolution, and then actually making this revolution when the time is right, when the conditions have been brought into being, and the millions and millions who must make this revolution are ready and determined to fight to make it.
Hey, this is Pete. I'm on the RNL team.
An end to institutionalized racism and murder by police. Nothing less. An end to any way people anywhere are used, abused, and brutalized. Nothing less.
Bob Avakian has written over 200 articles in the last 2 years. Articles taking on and challenging different political positions and ways of thinking in the wake of the beautiful uprising following the death of George Floyd. He has written crucial works like Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating. Articles on principles and methods, even about revolution and Roger Federer's tennis. He has taken on the accusation of cult and what motivates his works. He has written important articles on woke distractions and obstructions like A Serious Fight Against Injustice, Not a Petty Hustle for Ownership, Pronouns and Starving Children, Working with the Black Panthers, Working for Revolution, Not Woke Identity Bullshit, and the provocative article, BIPOC Leadership, There Is No Such Thing, The Fight Against Oppression and the Leadership That Is Needed. There's no such thing as BIPOC leadership. Yes, he wrote that. He says, these days we hear a lot from certain quarters about how it is necessary to follow the leadership of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. But in reality, there is no such thing as BIPOC leadership, and no such thing as BIPOC as some kind of uniform and unified social force. Of course, there are Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, and all of these peoples are subjected to various forms of discrimination and oppression. But there are very real differences within each of these peoples and between them. And he says, is the fascist Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas part of the BIPOC whose leadership should be followed? Was a repeat offender war criminal Colin Powell part of BIPOC while he was alive? What about Barack Obama, himself also guilty of terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity? How about the indigenous leaders who collaborated with the FBI to violently suppress the Wounded Knee uprising led by AIM, the American Indian Movement, in the 1970s, and similar types of reactionary indigenous leaders today? Or those fascist-minded Cubans and Venezuelans in South Florida? Or the Latino Catholic Church officials who are vigorously opposing the right to abortion? Or what about Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation in the Trump cabinet and wife of Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell? All these individuals are people of color, but should anybody be following them? BA goes on to say, if the answer to that is, of course people like that are not part of the BIPOC whose leadership should be followed, then who decides that people like that are not part of this BIPOC? If the answer to that is something along the lines that BIPOC people are those who are themselves oppressed or marginalized and represent the real interests of the marginalized, then this only begs yet other questions. Who decides this? Which people among the different BIPOC groups and subgroups with very different ideas and objectives get to decide what are the real interests of the marginalized? Who decides which people make up the authentic BIPOC, which in turn decides who can be part of BIPOC with the right to exercise BIPOC leadership? And so it goes, round and round in a narrow circle, never escaping the conceptual cul-de-sac the dead-end notion of BIPOC leadership. The whole idea of BIPOC leadership is based on the idealized notion that just because people are part of a group that is oppressed, that in itself endows them with some kind of righteous essence, automatically shielding them from the influence of the dominant bullshit in society, or that they have some kind of inherent special ability to identify the cause of oppression and what is necessary to put an end to it. This is not only wrong, it is actually very harmful. Of course, people who are oppressed have a lot to say about the effects of that oppression, and that is obviously important. But understanding where the oppression comes from and what to do about it requires most fundamentally taking up and applying a scientific method and approach to dig down to the underlying causes of things. And it is that scientific method and approach that will enable people, whatever their identity, to lead things where they need to go. And then BA says, all this points to this crucial fact. What is really of decisive importance is not what identity people may be part of, but what is the content of their ideas and programs? And if those ideas are followed and those programs are implemented, what would this lead to? Go to revcom.us to find the whole article and other works by Bob Avakian. Dig into this one and study his other works on woke distractions and obstructions. Ask yourself if what he is saying is true. Think about why he wrote them, and then share and spread them. Get involved as you learn more and watch the RNL Show, where we straight up bring you the leadership humanity needs.
In today's RNL Show, we have been emphasizing that a crucial part of the new communism is the emancipation of people all over the world. In 1979, there was a revolution to overthrow the Shah of Iran, a brutal king who was brought to power in 1953 through a CIA coup. This revolution unfortunately brought to power a new brutal theocratic Islamic regime, the IRI, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And ever since, women in Iran have been fighting against laws that made religious customs mandatory for all women, requiring all women to cover their bodies completely. Yet today, in some parts of the country, the regime mainly enforces the wearing of the hijab, the headscarf, which must completely cover their hair. And this is part of a whole set of laws in Iran depriving women of their basic rights. The struggle against these oppressive laws and for the liberation of women has been an important part of the struggle against this theocratic regime in Iran ever since 1979. And yet, in recent years, a movement of women began to publicly remove the headscarves, which has led to a number of women being jailed for this defiance. But it has also inspired greater rebellion against these reactionary laws and customs. This year, the Iranian government declared July 12th a national day of hijab and chastity. In opposition and defiance of this, women in different cities of Iran publicly and defiantly took off and discarded their hijabs and proudly walked with their hair uncovered. Many posted pictures of this on social media. They did this risking arrest and jail. They faced violent assaults from Iranian men and the religious police and forces of the misogynist laws that demand women wear the hijab. We're going to share a short video that beautifully and with great joy captures this day. You can feel how much these women's defiance and refusal to accept unjust laws is shaking up the hold of the regime's unjust laws imposed on half of their population that is female. If you feel outrage and rage at the horrendous oppression faced by women all over the world, this video lifts your heart. Seeing these brave women breaking one of those chains, the spirit of the women we see in this video inspires us and should be built on and linked with people all over the world to unleash the fury of women and bring that forward as a mighty force for revolution.
صبح چهارشنبهتون بخیر.
سلام مسیح جون، اینجا اصفهانه.
چهارشنبه کرمانشاه.
اینجا رامسره.
من از ساوه. ما در تهران هستیم، مشغول پیاده روی بدون حجاب. مسیح اینو فقط به خاطر تو گرفتم. میخوام ببینم کی به من حرف میزنه. اینجا ایرانه. چرا تو حق انتخاب آدم دخالت میکنه؟ خب بردهداری هم یه روز قانون بود. چرا به قانون بد نباید احترام گذاشت؟ قانونی که شأن انسانیت آدم زیر پا بذاره قانون بود. قانونی که آدم تحقیق کنه انسانیت آدم رو لغو کنه قانون.
بله. سرت کن کثافت.
به تو ربطی نداره. به تو ربطی نداره. عادتتون شده. خب ببخشید.
درست کن. درست کن.
الان با چی میزنی؟ با چی میزنی کسی؟
اجازه درست کن. ما شهید دادیم. اجازه درست کنه.
باری کلا آقا شما سعی کن با 4 تا موی یه خانم تحریک نشی. شما سعی کن نگاه نکنی با 4 تا مو تحریک نشی. شما اگه با 4 تا مو تحریک میشی بهتره بری جلو خودت نگه داری. جای خدا نیستی. بیا بالا خانم جمعش کن. دیگه کسی به این حرفا گوش نمیده.
آزادی برای همه زنان علیه زنان نباشیم. همه ما زنها باید حامی هم باشیم
و امیدوارم روزی برسه که ما زنان دیگه مجبور نباشیم برای طبیعی ترین حق خودمون مبارزه بکنیم.
یاسمن رو گرفتن، مژگان صدا شد. مژگان رو گرفتن، فرشته صدا شد. فرشته رو گرفتن، من بابا صدای فرشتم. من رو هم دستگیر کنید. تمام کسایی که برای صلح، آزادی و برابری و کرامت انسانی فعالیت میکنن رو دستگیر کنید. آقای خامنه‌ای،
من مطمئنم که تمام زنان دنیا به وجود زنان ایرانی افتخار میکنن به خاطر مقاومتشون، شجاعتشون و پایداریشون. روز زن به همه شما مبارک باشه.
That brings us to the end of this, the 112th episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on July 28th, 2022. Again, remind you that we are in the midst of a campaign to grow the audience of this show, to bring forward people to the revolution. Get involved with the revolution. DM us at the Revcoms. Donate and become a patron of this show. And spread the show to your friends. And we'll see you next week at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday night.